Hi guys, welcome to No Problemo. Today I will show you how to create standard looking Voronoi mesh with a twist. We will use Blender's fortunate ability to mess up some structures and some simulations, and with the use of a little bit of a cloth modifier, we will create really strange, neat looking shapes. So without further ado, let's go. Once in Blender, this is basically what we're trying to achieve. This, if you can believe it or not, is actually a mesh created through the use of Voronoi, with the use of cloth simulations, and with the help of pure old random error generating stuff that happens in Blender when you kind of mess up while using it. Basically, what this is a semi-parametric form that was created by starting out with a cloth modifier, making the standard procedure, and then doing something that I kind of figured out by accident recently, which is going into edit mode while simulating a cloth. Once a strange shape was chosen, and then we kind of did the steps for Voronoi mesh generation, and voila, that's what we got in the end. Okay, so let's delete everything that we have here and start out fresh and clean by creating the Voronoi mesh. Okay, so first things first, let's create the basic shape. In order to create the basic shape, we add a Shift-A ICO sphere. This is my favorite shape to play around with in terms of basic Voronoi mesh structures. If you want to start out with something else, that's fine. I think ICO sphere is going to be the most suitable. Now, what we do is go into modifier properties and add a modifier called subdivision surface. What it does is basically split up the surface to kind of like a smooth effect, except that it's not faking it. It's actually changing the structure and changing the polygons and making a bit more complicated shape. For now, levels viewport is 3. It's enough. It's more than enough. Don't click anything else. Let's add another modifier called decimate. Decimate is right here under generate. We add decimate and we change the option from collapse to planar. And we also have to choose all boundaries. What it does actually, I'll show you what happens if we don't choose it. If we change the angle limit to, let's say 25, we are going to have our structure split up into kind of like a soccer ball effect, or the basic Voronoi principle of dividing a mesh by decimating or reducing the amount of triangles or polygons in a given object. If we choose all boundaries, we're going to get rid of that really wonky looking face subdivision, which won't do any good for us at a later point. So let's make sure that have all boundaries turned on, and we can play around with the angle limit. So we can change this to 15 and we're going to have a lot more faces. If we change this to 60, we're going to have basically a really simple looking wonky Engon, which is not any way representing the sphere that we had before. Now, this also isn't a perfect sphere, but we're not making perfect spheres. This is just for testing. Next modifier that we have to add is a wireframe. So we go back into add modifier and we go all the way down to wireframe. Now, what wireframe does is basically takes all those edges and creates a kind of a cage-like effect for the rest of the object. The cage-like effect is going to be very simple. It's going to be based on a triangle, so it won't be rounded for now. We can play around with is the smoothness and basically the roundness of all those edges by adding yet another modifier. It's actually one that we added before. It is subdivision surface again. When we add subdivision surface, it's going to round off those elements. So let's do levels viewport of around 3. Now, if we're not satisfied with this kind of object, first of all, we can play around with the thickness of the wireframe. So let's do 0.2 and see what happens. Yeah, so it rounds off the whole object. It gives it more more of a depth, more of a thickness. And then in the meantime, we can actually play around with all these options without much consequence in terms of the shape, but we will influence the final product. So if we do a levels viewport on our first subdivision, let's say into 2, we will see changes in our structure. And actually what happens is that we kind of lose that Voronoi effect and we get the simple spherical subdivision. So the more levels viewport we do, the more wonky and irregularities we will have in those shapes. Planar, once again, if we do this, let's say 50, we're going to have just a few Voronoi subdivisions. If we do like 2, we're going to have a lot of subdivisions. This might mess up your model because we have a really big thickness of those elements. So what we should receive now is a shape that has interlapping thicknesses, which is basically going to look kind of like a pillow effect. But we don't want this. This has a lot of bad stuff that's happening right there. Let's go back into 25 and go back into that familiar, easy shape. If we scroll down, we can add yet another modifier that's going to give it a lot more depth, which is called cast. Cast isn't actually for creating depth. It is used a little bit differently, but I've tried it by adding more factor to it, and it turns out it does give it kind of like a depth effect, and it does change the shape. So if you want to give it more depth without playing around with scale, cast is the way to go. Once we have this, we can change the object shading into smooth, just to give it like this smooth finish. And we have our basic Voronoi structure. Now, the next step is to go crazy and use this information and use this experience with Voronoi and to add it to a cloth modifier, which has been played around with and made almost impossibly messed up by doing a little simple mess up that I kind of found out about a few days ago. So let's go back into Blender and let's delete this object. We won't need it. This was only for testing. Let's do a simple cloth modifier. So let's add a plane. Let's go into edit mode and let's do a subdivide. So right click, subdivide. I will do a subdivision of 100. If you have a little bit less potent computer, you can do around 50. Doesn't matter. Let's go into weight painting. And without doing those corners, I'm actually going to do a few spots here and there. Something like that. So these will be our anchor points where the cloth, once we do the cloth modifier, will basically catch upon. So let's add a modifier called cloth. Let's go into our physical properties or physics properties. Let's change the quality steps to 1 so it doesn't have to calculate too much. Let's scroll down and look for that pin group under shape. We click pin group and we choose group, and then we can press play. Very simple animation, nothing fancy, nothing complicated. What we do right now is basically just press tab. Press tab again, and then we have that crazy moment that just happened right there. And we can't really go back because if we play around, if we play the animation once again, it's not going to remember that what happened there. What we have to do is go back into tab, tab again, and just pause it right there, and we have that crazy looking shape-ish thing. We can press play or space and give it a little bit more time to fix it. We can work with this. I think the shape that had more of those like really crazy triangles would be a little bit more effective or more suitable for us. So let's go back into this. Once again, I press tab out, and press space really quickly. And we have this crazy shape. I'm going to press space a little bit more. Oh, there we go. That's what I was looking for. This really crazy mumbo-jumbo mess of things that happened while simulating in Blender. And this should be fine. We can go back into this. So I'm going to press play and see if we can find a frame that's even more suitable. I kind of want to have a little bit more of that, of this kind of structure with a mix of those wonky looking elements. So I'm going to press play again, go into tab mode, tab out. It was there for a second. There was a nice structure. Oh, this also has it. So this is what I'm looking for. I'm looking for a mix of really low poly triangles or low poly polygons, and then with that rational mix of that high poly. Maybe we can go into this thing. This is really random stuff. Okay, I think we can kind of work with this, maybe. Let's play around with this again. Sometimes it's just a matter. Okay, I think we can play around with this one because I like that. I like to see those subdivisions there. Once we have this crazy looking shape, what we have to do is, as soon as possible, go into our modifier properties, go into cloth, and click apply. And before I do this, just to make a more of a bigger imprint on what I was doing. What I was doing is basically, first of all, I allowed the shape to commence with the usual simulation. So I just pressed play. I did nothing in the beginning. But what I did do is I pressed tab. So I went into like edit mode while it was simulating. If I go out of edit mode while simulating, it just goes really crazy. I don't know why this happens. This is something to do with the coding for the simulation. And so every single time I do this, I get a really neat looking crazy effect. And what I'm looking for is the frame where we get a nice looking shape. And this is like literally just a couple of frames across. So we're not going to have too much to look for. If we don't find it, we can, of course, just press play again, have it do another cycle of the simulation, do a tab out, and just look for a shape that we would like to play around with. So let's go into, let's see what happens here. Okay, I will play around with the shape. This is gonna be my, let's say, final model. I go into modifier properties, go into cloth, and click this arrow here and just click apply. So we're not gonna simulate cloth anymore. If I press play, nothing's gonna happen. It's not a cloth anymore. This is a stable, solid object. Now what we do here is basically what we did before to the previous models. So we did, what we added is subdivision surface. Subdivision surface is gonna round off the entire object. It's gonna give it a little bit more of a smooth feeling. So let's do, I think 3 is more than enough. Maybe for some of you guys, 2 is going to be fine. This will be kind of render heavy in terms of calculating this shape. Let's add the next one, which is decimate. Next modifier. Let's go into planar. Let's make sure to see now. It's doing work. It's actually lagging. Let's do all boundaries, and let's choose an angle limit. Let's say 20. Let's see what happens with 20. It's loading. It's loading. Okay. We don't really see much going on, much happening, and nothing really changed. It did go. It did make the shape a little bit less complicated. Let's just leave it for now. Let's add the wireframe modifier. Boom. So we're waiting for wireframe to calculate. This will turn all those edges into mesh structures, and what we get here is this really wonky, crazy looking shape, this is one of a kind. This is, to be able to reproduce this shape is almost impossible in terms of one-to-one. So once you create the shape, do not expect to be able to go back into the simulation process or the cloth modifier and to be able to get that same shape. I mean, there is literally one of a billionth chance that you will get a similar shape, because There's a lot of factors that influence this. So for now, this will suffice. This is actually quite nice looking. What we do next is we add another subdivision surface to round off those edges. So we have subdivision surface. It is loading on. I'm sorry if my face is blocking off some of those modifiers, but I hope that you can see the name, and I try to state the name as clearly as possible, so there's no problem in terms of finding the correct modifier. As you can see here, my computer is almost crashing, and what's happening here is basically I am rounding off a lot of data. I am calculating a lot of stuff, and Blender is not the best software for this stuff. So this gray screen will be something that you will have to fight and work with a lot. So do not get discouraged if something like this happens. I will pause my video here and wait for it to recalculate. If not, I will redo it and do it with a lot less triangles. Maybe that subdivision surface from beforehand has had the effect of making the gray screen appear like that. If it does take longer than 10 minutes, I think you should just close Blender and try to redo it again. This wasn't really complicated, so this shouldn't take too much time to redo. Just to clarify, this stuff is experimental. It's gonna mess up Blender once in a while, and this is gonna be standard, so do not get discouraged. Let's see what... Oh, it's back. Awesome, didn't have to even pause. This is what happens once it did the subdivision. I will not change the subdivision from beforehand. Let's go into the subdivision below wireframe and add one more step. I hope this doesn't crash my computer again. It might though. So it's rounding off that shape. I think it might be wise to go back into the first subdivision, now that I think about it, and do one step down. Let's do the first subdivision of 2. It's going to change the shape. It's going to change the way that the whole element's going to look like. Maybe not really drastically, but it's going to change a lot of elements. So it's actually going back into thinking about, first of all, a lot less steps. It's going to redecimate the whole thing. It's going to rewireframe the whole thing. And it's going to re-subdivide the whole rewiring in the whole hierarchy of elements. That's why it's important not to do too much subdivision. Perhaps that plane that I did before with the 100 subdivision might be too much. But, you know, if we don't risk it, we don't get anything fancy and crazy looking out of it. So let's see what... Is it done? No, it's not, because we're going to get that awesome gray screen again, or that circle of death, the loading circle of death. Okay. Nothing changed too much. It's still basically the same shape. Let's go down here, and let's do this subdivision of a little bit higher, so that it smoothens out that shape once again. It is smoothing, it is smoothing, it is smoothing. Yes, it's smoothened out. Now, the next step that we can add is that depth. We can do this through wireframe thickness, so let's add it to 0.05. Oops, I did 0.5. No. It's going to be thick. That's going to mess it up. We're going to get this. Ooh, wow, that was crazy. That looks like that doesn't look too good, actually. Let's go back into 0.05. Really wonky stuff, you know. This isn't standard Blender. This is just crazy Blender. This is messing up Blender. I think the Blender Foundation is like thinking, what are you doing to our beautiful software? And okay, we got that calculated. Let's add that. What was it called again? The cast. There it is. The cast modifier. Now the cast modifier is gonna give that final depth of that shape. So we're gonna have to wait for it to load a little bit. And okay, Now cast, as I can see here, it's kind of being influenced by the center point of gravity, or the 0, 0, 0 point in Blender. So let's do a factor. Oh, I just grabbed and pulled. That's not a good idea to do in Blender at this point. I think it's much better just to type in a factor, because if we drag and pull, it's going to load every single point along that path with a kind of like a symbolic simplicity. But it's a lot more effective if we just basically typed in, let's say, 0.3. I think it is going to influence only this part around the 0, 0, 0 axes. We shouldn't see too much change here. Yeah, it is more than likely being influenced here. So what we can do is we can move our whole object down just to have it centered. And let's change that factor to 1. See what happens with 1. It is once again loading. The awesome loading circle of death is going to stalk us a lot. Okay, this is crazy. I did not expect this to happen, but okay. Let's do 2. Let's see what happens if we press 2. It's yet again loading. The awesome circle of death is appearing. Do not worry about that circle. Okay. Okay, so we got a lot more neat stuff. I am actually not... for once, I think this is kind of neat. You know, for some, this might be something that you are looking forward to. For me, this stuff that's happening here is really... it doesn't look too good. I mean, you know, this is experimental. This is just for fun, just for playing around with and looking for crazy different looking shapes. So, yeah, maybe this is an effect that we like to have. If we'd like to go back, we can just basically delete the cast modifier and go back into that first shape that we had, which is kind of like a loosely floating, free floating object in the middle of space. So which is this thing. So yeah, we kind of got a really similar effect to what I showed beforehand, but yet again, it's not exactly the same. That's because the simulation just has so many different levels of change and has so many different inputs and outputs that it's almost impossible to get the same exact effect, because we have a factor of the frame that we are pausing or doing the tab edit mode on. We have the factor of those pinpoints, or the pin group that we chose by weight painting. We have the factor of randomness sometimes in the simulation. So there's so many other things that still influence it that we can't go back, basically. That's why it's experimental. This is one of a kind. So yeah, that's what it looks like. Thank you for your patience with this really crazy video, and I hope to see you soon. And have a good one. Bye-bye.